Hi, gun people. Know your rights. Now, a lot of people may think when I do these case reviews that only applies to cops. It probably applies to cops more, but it also makes a citizen more educated when cops try to pull things or do things. And from a cop perspective, a lot of cops will be like, it's not my job. I can't remember all these case laws. I don't know. You need to understand what case law is so you can tell the DA why you did something and why you think it's admissible and what you were thinking of. Because a lot of DAs do not know all the laws that happen. I mean, they just can't keep up. So unless somebody's dealing with Miranda issues, they may not be aware of this new case law. And if you keep yourself self-educated and you stay up on it, then it's going to make you a better cop. It's going to make you a better citizen. It's going to make you more aware. And again, no attorney knows all the laws and all the cases and everything. They just can't do it. But if you can tell them where to go and what case, you don't have to say people versus. You have to say there is case law on Miranda that says I can do what I did, and I remember reading it. And if you read a whole bunch of things, I mean, I only usually read a point of view, so I always knew you can find it in a point of view. And attorneys have a book, I forgot what it's called, Westlaw or something law, that they go in and when they type in a word Miranda, all the case laws come up, and they can look at for state, for federal, for Supreme Court, whatever. So they have a pretty good database to research something. So they can find something pretty easy. So let's take a look at this case here. And we're dealing with Miranda again because Miranda seems to trick a lot of officers and a lot of people up on whether or not they're covered or they need to. Remember, Miranda, basic, short, and simple. You need two things. It's a two-pronged test. You need custody and interrogation. If the person feels they're in custody, meaning they don't have a right to leave, and if they're being interrogated about a crime by government, then Miranda applies, and you can't do it unless you're Mirandized. Now, if there is no custody or there's no interrogation by government, then you're free to go. So in this case, it's kind of iffy. I would have missed this one because I kind of thought this wasn't going to fly, but it did. Okay, did officers violate Miranda after a murder suspect invoked? They placed him in a room with the girlfriend and asked her to question him. Now, the first thing came to mind here is when cops use people to do their job, that person becomes an agent of the officer. So if they ask the girlfriend to go buy dope and she's an informant, she's an agent of the officer. So therefore, a lot of things that apply to them apply to now their agent. Now, when they sent her in a room to question him after he invoked, my initial response was, I don't think so. Because he already said he wanted a lawyer, and now you're using an agent to go in and question him. But I was wrong. Okay, let's see. So facts here. While babysitting his 6-month-old daughter, her name was Mia, Orozco phoned Mia's mother and said the child had stopped breathing. Now, just from working a lot of child cases and child abuse cases, whoever calls in these odd things that happen to children when they're in our custody, 90% of the time they're lying. I don't know what happened. I just stopped breathing. I don't know why. I turned my back and her ribs were broken and she was bleeding. Yeah, okay, whatever. It's never the truth. But anyway, as soon as I read the first part, I went, this dude's lying. But anyway, I digress. Let me get back to this. Said the child had stopped being Mia's mother, immediately returned home, found that Mia was dead. Los Angeles, why did he call the wife instead of 911? Well, because he's freaking guilty. Rick, you can't say that. You can't judge. Shut up, you big dummies. Los Angeles County Sheriff's detectives responded and saw that Mia had been beaten. Maybe mom should have saw that. They would later learn that she suffered 29 bruises, 7 rib fractures, a punctured right lung, and a lacerated liver. Pretty good beating. At the scene, Orozco claimed he did not know how Mia had injured. Gee, that's a shocker. Who could have predicted that one? We need to get Ray Charles out on the scene to give us that play-by-play. But he agreed to accompany the detectives for further questioning. Now, when he agrees, there's no custody because he has a choice. Just like when you call 911, you get no Miranda because you have a choice to talk, hang up, or call. So you lose Miranda protection. Anything you say can be used against you. Nobody has to advise you of rights. They can ask you all kind of questions they want, even though they're government. And if you answer, you're toast. But I digress. Let's stay on this. Although Orozco had not been arrested, the detectives Mirandize him. And the reason why the cops Mirandize him is anytime I transport or I talk to somebody in a police station, I know the defense attorney is going to come back and say, he was in custody. He was in a police station. Didn't you bring him in a back room? Isn't there a buzzer to where he has to get in? He couldn't have went in that back room without you, right? So you escorted him. If you escorted him, he wasn't free to leave. He didn't go anywhere that you didn't want to. So there's always issues when you bring people to question them. Now, a lot of times cops will get around it, and I've done it if we can do it, if we set it up right, to say, look, and we get it on tape. Hey, guy, you're here of your own free will. If you don't want to talk to us, we really appreciate you cooperating with us. But if you want to leave, the door's unlocked. All you got to do is get up and walk out. We want to make sure you understand. We're not arresting you. We're not taking you to jail. You're not in handcuffs. We're not searching you. We're your friends. We're here to help, and you can leave at any time. Now, if you get all that on tape and the guy goes, oh, yeah, I know, I can leave. Now it's going to be harder for him to say, I felt that I was in custody. But a lot of times, if you bring him in a station, it's just easier to Mirandize him, especially if you've already got him and you really don't care if he gives you a statement or not. Mirandize him so you don't lose it and he comes back later. All right, let me get back on point. Although Orozco had not been arrested, a detective Mirandized him, okay, apparently because the likelihood of the interview would become contentious. Well, of course it would, because they're going to say you're freaking lying, you killed the kid, confess, you piece of... I digress. And it did. Orozco continued to deny knowing anything about Mia's injuries, and the detectives continues to express skepticism, meaning they said, you're a damn liar. But he eventually invoked his right to counsel and was arrested. Now, once he's arrested, we have custody. Miranda didn't apply before. It applies now if they question him once he's been arrested. But they didn't question him. They just arrested him. These are all little key facts. Okay, before he was taken to jail, however, I don't know who wrote this. I hope this wasn't Mark Hutchins because he's a better writer than this. This thing kind of doesn't read good. Before he was taken to jail, however, he asked to speak alone with Mrs. Martinez. This is the mother of the child. This request was granted, but before she entered the interview room, one of the detectives asked her to try and get a full explanation out of him. Okay, when you ask somebody to do something for you as government, they become your agent. So as soon as she agrees and she goes in there, she is the agent of the government. And that's where it tripped me up that I thought they were going to lose this. Adding, and again, you always want to kind of poke a mother's love for her child a little bit, because mothers are kind of funny. Everybody think they're all about the children, but when they get with a guy that they want to hang with, that they'll forgive anything. They'll get into that guy, will smooth talk him, and they'll be like in his arms, and they'll blame the kid for getting killed. I mean, it's just crazy what you see mothers do. But if you tug at their heartstrings a little bit and get them to kind of say, hey, this is your daughter. Remember, she depended on you. She loved you. She expects you to protect her. You couldn't protect her, and she's dead now, but now you can go in there and at least find out what happened to her. So we say these things to provoke the maternal instinct and to get the mom to want to entrap the boyfriend. Because a lot of times the moms want to protect the boyfriend. They'll go in there and say, hey, man, the cops told me to ask you something. Don't talk to me or don't admit anything. And you're like, okay, that didn't work out real well. Anyway, I digress. So the mother of Mia, that you have the right to know. So they told her, you have the right to know everything. You're the mother, blah, blah. Ms. Martinez tried. It would soon become apparent that this wasn't going to work out. So one of the detectives, this is called priming. Sometimes they'll prime an investigation. If we set up a wiretap and we sit on it for a couple, 3 days, and we don't get any information about the crime, we'll prime the suspects. We'll either try to get something in the paper. We'll try to get something in the neighborhood. We'll have a little snitch, drop the word. Somehow we'll get, so the suspect doesn't know, but we're actually putting the thought of the crime in his mind, so then it's easier for him to talk about it, and it doesn't look like we're trying to get him to talk about it. Well, that's what this cop kind of did here. He kind of primed the situation a little bit. Although Mrs. Bettina tried, it wasn't going to work out. One of the detectives entered the room and said he had just received a coroner's report that the autopsy showed that Mia had been beaten to death. Now, whether that's true or correct, Doesn't matter. Irrelevant. This is where people say cops can lie, you can't trust them. We can lie in an investigation, we can lie about witnesses, we can lie about things like this because the lie is to provoke or to get somebody to say something without coercion, without trying to make them. We're just making statements, whether they're true. Like I said, on one of my cases, I think I did a crazy cop story. We had some kid in there who did something, I can't remember what it was. I say kid, I don't know, 18, 20, whatever. And I went in and made a photocopy of my hand, circled the fingers on a photocopy, and showed the kid and said, hey, we got your prints, man. Here's a copy of the prints. We just ran them out. It came back to you. And the guy confessed. It was a photocopy of my hand. So, and I lied, but he confessed. So it doesn't matter if I lie. So this cop said, and again, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if they had the coroner's report or he was just kind of ad-libbing, but he wanted to prime the suspect to kind of provoke something, maybe out of the mother and a little remorse out of the child killer piece of crap. Anyway, coroner's office autopsy had been beaten to death. The detective then left the room. Mrs. Martinez continued to press Orozco for the explanation, saying, if you love me, you will tell me the truth. He confessed. Ooh, good job, Mrs. Martinez. Prior to trial, Orozco filed a motion, his lawyer filed a motion, to suppress the correction on the grounds that it was obtained in violation of Miranda. The motion was denied. Orozco was found guilty and sentenced to life. Now, when I first read that, I go, oh man, they're going to suppress that because she was an agent. But there's a couple case laws that I wasn't aware of. So, let's talk about the discussion here. It was settled that the officers must obtain Miranda waiver from the suspect in custody before asking the questions that are reasonably likely to elicit an incriminating response. So that's another thing about Miranda that people get wrong. I can ask you your name. I can ask you where you live because those aren't things that are going to make you guilty. I'm getting information for booking or arresting. And a lot of people go, I have the right to remain silent. I don't have to answer you. Well, Miranda doesn't apply for things that aren't eliciting an incriminating response. Now, if I think you murdered somebody and you live next door and you tell me you were just walking by and now I'm like, well, isn't it true that you live next door? Because I just checked the mailbox. There's mail addressed to you and it says your address next door. And the guy says yes. Now I can't use that. Even though it's an address, it was to incriminate him. So you have to know the difference between, is the question an incriminating or is it not? Is it just information for booking? Okay, it is also settled that officers must stop questioning a suspect who has invoked his rights. So as soon as the guy says, I want a lawyer and I don't want to, we have to stop. Now, we don't really have to stop. We're just going to lose everything that we don't stop. And a lot of cops don't stop. They're like, great, you revoked. I still want to get something out of you. Because if I get it out of you, maybe the feds can use it. Maybe I can use it to impeach you. If you take the stand and lie, then I don't bring your statement in that I got in violation of Miranda. I don't bring it in to convict you. I bring it in to impeach you because you lied on the stand and you told us something different. So there's other ways to get in. So some cops will do this, but they're usually advised not to because it muddies the water and it looks like you're trying to subvert or kind of get around the law and do illegal things and violate the Constitution, etc. All right. There are, however, certain exceptions to these rules, and one of them is the so-called undercover agent exception. It provides that subsequent questioning is permitted if a person asking the question is an undercover officer or civilian police agent, which that woman became, and if the officer or agent did not utilize coercion. So you can do it if it's an undercover agent or that, as long as they don't use coercion. So, as California Supreme Court explained, Miranda does not apply when the suspect is in the process of a custodial interrogation. And the reason they put that in there is because if we're in there questioning him, he goes, I want an attorney, and then we try to pull this in the same interview room. Well, I guess that's not true because that's kind of exactly what happened. As soon as he invoked, they left and sent in their agent. When a suspect is in a process of an custodial, Miranda does not apply when the suspect is in the process of a custodial interrogation. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read the rest of it. He makes a voluntary statement to someone the suspect does not believe is a police officer or agent, and a conversation assumes it is private. And that's how they got this in. He made a voluntary statement to the mother's wife, which he thought was private, and therefore it was used against him, even though she was an agent. And there was another case, and I knew this case, that we could send in an undercover agent in jail, because when you're in jail, you're in custody. But it's not an interrogation type thing, and the person doesn't know you're a cop if you're an undercover agent. So I know there was a government exception for that, and they actually quote that one. I didn't know it was Illinois Perkins, but I knew there was a case. In Illinois versus Perkins, the defendant, Donald Charlton, were inmates at a correctional facility. One day, Perkins told Charlton that he had committed the murder in East St. Louis. Wow, that's a shocker. I didn't know anybody got killed in East St. Louis. Anyway, for which he had not been arrested. Charlton ran his little snitch ass and notified the investigating officer about Perkins' admission. And then the officers devised a plan whereby an undercover officer, John, who would pose as a fellow inmate, would engage Perkins in casual conversation and report anything about the murder. During such conversation, Paris broached the subject of the East St. Louis murder. Perkins proceeded to describe it at length, and Perkins was later charged with the murder, and his statement was used against him at trial. He was convicted. Now, when you get statements like this in undercover, you can't convict a guy just because he said, yeah, I killed the dude in East St. Louis. That's why it says he described it at length, meaning the officer asked specific questions that only the murderer would know, like what kind of weapon, how many times was he stabbed, where was he stabbed. He didn't ask it like that. He was like, dude, you stabbed him? Shit, how many times you stabbed him? I stabbed him 3 times, man. Really? Did you stab him all in the stomach? No, man, I hit him in the chest, and I hit him in the back of the neck and then in the head. Okay, now we know this guy has specific information about the crime that only the killer would know. So that's what they're talking about when they talk about in detail. Okay, he engaged conversation. He was convicted. On appeal, the Supreme Court, Perkins argued that his un-Mirandized statement should have been suppressed because Perkins was a police officer whose conduct constitutional was a custodial interrogation. Was he in custody? Yes. Was he being interrogated? Maybe. If and buts coconuts. He was being asked about the murder, but it wasn't an interrogation to where you're locked in a room, you're in handcuffs, and he did not know government wasn't questioning. He wasn't talking to somebody with a badge and a gun. He thought it was a private conversation, and that's how it got in. The court, however, rejected the argument, said a conversation between suspect and undercover agents do not implicate the concerns underlining Miranda. The central ingredients of a police-dominated atmosphere, that's the interrogation part, and the compulsion of not present when an incarcerated person speaks freely to someone that he believes is a fellow inmate. He didn't think he was talking to government. If he knew he was talking to government and he was in custody, then they would lose it. These are all little things that trip cops up when they try to get slick and they don't know how the courts are ruling. Applying this ruling to facts of Orozco, the court concluded that even though Orozco had previously invoked his right to counsel, and even though the detective asked Martinez to try and obtain a statement, they did not violate Miranda because, one, he was unaware of the ploy. Orozco was unaware that she was a government agent. And two, Martinez did not utilize any form of coercion. Therefore, it passed the 2-pronged test. And finally, contended detectives had eventually interrogated him. This is what the attorney argued. Contended the detectives had effectively interrogated him when he interrupted and interviewed the report with the coroner and had beaten to death. Now, this is where the attorney got pretty slick and said, wait a minute. Government did come in when she was questioning him, and he came in, exerted his authority as a cop, and Orozco knew he was a cop, and he walked in and said he had been beaten to death. So, therefore, he was assisting in the investigation. Therefore, it was a government interrogation. Now, I'm just paraphrasing, but I guarantee you that's what the defense attorney was arguing. This is a valid argument, but it did not matter. Why? Because Orozco did not respond to the detective's statement. He didn't engage him, and he didn't give up any information when he thought he was talking to government. He just heard the statement, and government left. And that's the only reason. They would have lost this had government got in. If he looked at him and goes, man, are you sure he's dead? Yeah, man, he's dead. How do you know he's dead? Was he beat, or what did they say? And if they got into conversation, they would have lost his statement. So I think this is probably by luck. Maybe the officer planned not to say anything, but it's a good thing he did plan it, because had he said anything, he'd have lost it. As the court pointed out, had the defendant interrogated, but he did not. Instead, the defendant said nothing, and the officer left. At that point, the defendant resumed his one-on-one conversation with Martina, completely unaware that she was an agent of the police. Orozco was convicted and affirmed. Yay! Bad guy goes to jail. All right. So that's the case. You may not remember all the facts, but you kind of, again, the more cases you read, the more you kind of figure out how the court works, what their thought process is, how government is held in check, and how government can sometimes wiggle around the checks and balances and still get the bad guy. The problem is when they start wiggling around innocent people just to convict them, like they're doing with the Trump and the Manafort and all the other guys they're sending to jail, which has nothing to do with Russian collusion, has nothing to do with the initial investigation. It is a simple phishing acquisition, and all they want to do is put people in jail and ruin people's lives. Absolutely atrocity what the Mueller investigation is doing. But you know what? The left they're just destroying America. Left, what do they care, man? If they just run around lighting fires and burning up America, poor Smokey the Bear's running around like shit. The whole damn country's on fire, and the liberals are just getting away with it. All right, we'll end that there.